Story 1 was 400 miles into his through hike, and the Appalachian Trail had become less a path through the woods and more a steady, gray hum beneath his feet. The world had simplified to the rhythm of his steps, the weight of his pack, and the constant, damp smell of leaf litter. He was seeking silence, a deep and unyielding void left by a life back in the city, a life he no longer recognized. He was finding it, but the silence, he was learning, was not empty. He had started noticing the signs in Southern Virginia. Not the white blaze markers, but the other ones. At first, it was just the warnings. In the register at the last shelter, scrawled beneath the usual, "Go team" and mile counts, someone had written in thick, desperate ink, "Do not answer if you hear a familiar voice. Especially not your own." A few days later, while buying resupply in a tiny, one-stoplight town, a wizened old woman had stopped him. Her eyes, the color of creek stones, held him fast. "You're walking the spine, ain't ya, boy?" she'd rasped. Ethan nodded. She leaned in close, the scent of wood smoke and sage thick around her. "The mountain gives you 3 rules. Break 1, and it takes its due. Never walk where the blaze is faded, never turn back for lost gear, and never, ever answer the call." Ethan, a rationalist raised on concrete and fiber optics, had dismissed it as quaint, spooky folklore. But the memory settled, a cold seed in his mind, as the miles stretched on. He was now hiking a remote section in North Carolina, one known for neglected trails and fewer hikers. The solitude here was profound, almost physical. The fog was his constant companion, a damp, shifting ceiling that filtered the weak sunlight into a perpetual twilight. That evening, he was aiming for the old man's knoll shelter, a notorious relic that the guidebook warned was poorly maintained and rarely used. Perfect, Ethan had thought. He reached the shelter just before dusk. It wasn't poorly maintained. It was actively decaying. The roof sagged like an old dog's back, and the stone fireplace was choked with generations of cold, wet ashes. A single, wide-planked wooden sleeping platform was all that remained. He set up his tent inside the shelter, a move that felt safer than sleeping exposed. The air grew immediately heavy. As the last shreds of light bled out of the sky, he ate a quick dinner of rehydrated chili and listened. The silence was total, broken only by the crackle of his jet boil. No owls, no crickets, no rustling deer. Just the weight of the ancient earth and rock around him. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. He crawled into his sleeping bag, zipped the tent shut, and pulled out his headlamp to read. He managed maybe 3 pages before his eyelids grew heavy. The last thing he saw before drifting off was the dull, gray glow of the full moon visible through the cracked, skeletal roof. Ethan woke instantly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence was still there, but now it was a roar. He checked his phone. 2:47 a.m. Then he heard it. It was a sound that shouldn't exist. A small, almost childlike snickering right outside his tent fly. It wasn't malicious, more like a playful, knowing laugh, the sound of someone watching him. He froze, straining his ears against the sound of his own pulse. The laughter stopped. A moment later, a voice spoke. "Ethan." It was a low, clear whisper, closer than a foot away, yet somehow muffled, like it was speaking through something thick and heavy. Gooseflesh erupted across his arms. He knew the old woman's rules. He knew the register warning. Do not answer the call. He squeezed his eyes shut and repeated the mantra of his journey. It's a fox. It's wind. It's a trick of the echo. The voice called again, slightly louder, slightly sharper. Ethan, I know you're awake. This time, the sound was undeniably a voice, but it wasn't human. It was pitched too high, yet it carried a strange metallic reverberation that sunk into the bone. It was also undeniably his name, spoken with the intimate familiarity of a best friend or a family member. It sounded like someone he should know. A sudden, irrational terror flooded him. What if it was another hiker, injured or disoriented? What if they were teasing him? If he ignored a legitimate human emergency, he'd never forgive himself. This was the rationalist's fatal flaw, prioritizing logical concern over primal instinct. He reached for the zipper on his tent. "Don't break the rule, Ethan." He hesitated, his hand hovering over the zip. Then, the voice changed. It dropped lower, becoming melodic, aching. "Ethan, honey, where are you? The little ones miss you, Ethan. We're right here." The sound was his wife's voice. Or, more accurately, the ghost of it. The sweet, lilting tone she used just before she tucked their children in. His wife, whom he had left, whom he hadn't spoken to in 3 months. The sheer impossible intimacy of the mimicry shattered his resolve. They're here. She's here. It's a trick, but it's her. He grabbed his knife, kicked open the tent zipper, and lunged out into the black interior of the shelter. "Who's there? Show yourself," he yelled. The shout sounded small and frantic in the overwhelming dark. He shone his headlamp around the shelter. Nothing. No one. Only the crumbling stone walls, the wet ashes, and the heavy air. The light beam caught a small, wooden crucifix nailed upside down on a support beam, half rotted by moisture. He stepped out of the shelter and swept the light across the clearing. The fog had intensified, a swirling, opaque barrier that turned the woods into a gray, featureless wall. The voice was gone. The silence had returned, but now it was watching him. Ethan stood breathing hard, the knife useless in his hand. He hadn't seen anything, but he had answered the call. The first rule was broken. He retreated back into his tent, shaking, but he couldn't sleep. He listened until dawn, but the woods made no further sound. He packed up early, the rising sun doing little to dispel the gloom. The air felt heavy, like the day before a storm, even though the sky was a pale, clear blue overhead. He was on the trail for perhaps 30 minutes when he felt it, the cold lightness on his back. He stopped, unclipped his pack, and dropped it onto the spongy trail. He stared at the side pocket where he kept his GPS satellite messenger. The pocket was unzipped. The device was gone. Ethan cursed, checking the other pockets, then frantically backtracking a few dozen yards. Nothing. He checked the tent again. He'd taken it down and packed it inside the shelter. The satellite messenger, his one lifeline, was nowhere. He remembered the second rule: never turn back for lost gear. He stood there, halfway between the present and the past, the shelter now an unnerving, silent ruin half hidden by the fog. His common sense screamed, "Go back. Search until you find it." But the memory of the voice, his wife's voice, and the old woman's warning were stronger. He felt a deep, sickening certainty. This wasn't a loss. It was a theft. The mountain was collecting its payment for the broken rule. If he turned back now, he was violating the second rule and sealing his fate. He had to go forward. He cinched his pack straps and started walking, moving faster than he should, fleeing the silence. The rest of the day was a study in paranoia. Every shadow was a shape, every branch crack a footfall. He started seeing things out of the corner of his eye, a blur of movement, something tall and dark that slipped behind a tree trunk just as he looked. The worst was the tracks. Around noon, he stopped by a small, muddy spring to refill his bottles. Next to the spring, pressed into the black mud, was a single, disturbing track. It was vaguely human, a large footprint with 5 toes, but the toes were elongated, almost like fingers, and the heel was unnaturally narrow and pointed. What chilled him was not the shape, but the location. The track was pointed backwards, the toe facing the direction it had come from. He spun around, scanning the woods wildly. He was alone. He scrubbed the track out with the heel of his boot and moved on, but the image remained. It was watching him go, retreating in the opposite direction from its stride. That night, he didn't risk a shelter. He hiked until he was exhausted and found a relatively clear, flat patch of ground off trail, several hundred feet from the nearest blaze. He pitched his tent quickly, foregoing the rainfly despite the dampness, just so he could hear the slightest approach. He didn't make a fire. He ate cold jerky and nuts, and huddled inside his sleeping bag, the knife on his chest. The sounds started later, around 1 a.m. They were distant at first. The sound of a heavy body dragging through the leaves, several hundred yards away. It wasn't a bear. It was too deliberate, too slow. It sounded like an enormous, weary man dragging something heavy, possibly a log or an animal carcass. Drag, scrape, pause. Drag, scrape, pause. The sound was moving slowly around the clearing, charting a massive circle that encompassed his position. Ethan barely dared to breathe. He kept his headlamp off, relying on the weak, cloudy moonlight filtering through the trees. Then, the creature started to sing. It wasn't a song he knew. It was a wordless, high-pitched lullaby, the kind of tune a mother might hum to a sick child. The sound was horribly beautiful, laced with a sadness so profound it felt like a physical ache. But underneath the melody was that metallic, alien rasp he'd heard the night before. It was close now, perhaps 50 yards away, and the singing stopped abruptly. Then came the voice, clear and loud, but hollow, like a sound piped through an empty drum. Ethan. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was an almost perfect imitation of his own voice, the voice he heard in his head, slightly flat, slightly weary. It was his voice calling his name. Ethan, you can stop running. I just want to show you the trail. The real trail. We can start over. We can be silent together. It was trying to negotiate. It was trying to be him. Ethan realized with chilling clarity that this creature wasn't just a simple predator. It was a mimic. It was using his loss, his regret, and his desperate need for silence against him. The things it stole, the GPS, the peace, were things that tied him to the human world, to the hope of rescue or connection. He lay there, rigid, sweat freezing on his skin. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He hadn't answered the second call, but the creature knew he was there. The silence returned. This time, it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like disappointment. An hour passed. 2 hours. Ethan heard nothing. He thought it had gone. Then, a sudden, wet thump landed right outside his tent wall. Something heavy, cold, and sticky. He didn't need to look. He knew it was the satellite messenger, coated in mud and something slicker. The creature had violated the third rule for him. It had returned the lost gear. It wasn't interested in a mere collection of debt. It wanted his will. It was forcing the interaction, drawing him out. He heard the heavy, dragging scrape begin again, but this time, it was moving away. Ethan didn't wait for dawn. He emerged from his tent, grabbed the messenger, it was slimy and cold, and tossed it into the deepest part of a briar patch. He was done with rules, and he was done with games. He had to get off the mountain. He hiked relentlessly for hours in the pre-dawn gloom, stumbling through the mist, his eyes raw from lack of sleep. When the sun finally rose, the air felt lighter, less oppressive. He reached a point where the trail began a steep, downward descent, leading, he hoped, toward a paved road and civilization. He paused at the top of the ridge, scanning the vast, rolling green mountains behind him. He needed one last look to confirm he was safe. As he turned, he saw it. Standing perhaps 100 yards back down the trail he had just traveled, at the transition point between the dense fog and the morning light, was the caller. It wasn't a bear, or a man, or a cryptid from a storybook. It was a shape that was trying to be all three and failing horribly. It was taller than any man, unnaturally gaunt, with long, spindly limbs. It was draped in tattered, dark furs and what looked like patches of moss and bark. Its face was what broke Ethan. It was trying to mold itself into a human face. A narrow chin, a nose, two deep-set eyes, but the features were constantly shifting, like mud trying to hold a shape it wasn't meant to keep. And in its chest, where a heart should be, there was a black, perfectly round hole of absolute nothingness. It didn't move, but it tilted its head, a gesture of almost innocent curiosity. Then, from the black hole in its chest, the voice came out one final time, loud and powerful, echoing through the valley. "Ethan, are you going to leave your family?" This time, it wasn't a mimicry. It wasn't his wife. It was the collective sound of every voice he had ever loved or disappointed, a chorus of accusation, regret, and sorrow. The temptation to shout back, to explain his choices, to apologize, to connect, was overwhelming. His feet started to move back toward the thing, pulled by the sheer gravity of his guilt. He stopped himself an inch from disaster, slamming his boots down. He threw his pack off his back, letting it tumble down the ridge. He would violate every rule, but he would not stop running. He turned and bolted down the steep trail, scrambling over roots and rock, never once looking back at the thing that was forever trying to make a sound and forever failing to be human. He ran until his lungs were on fire and his legs were numb. He ran until the scent of pine and moss was replaced by the acrid smell of hot asphalt and exhaust. He found the road. He found a gas station. He found a ride. Ethan left the trail that day. He never went back. He had sought silence, but he had found something far worse. The silence was only the sound of the woods waiting for him to answer. And he had. He still gets calls sometimes, late at night, a sound pitched too high, a familiar voice on the other end. He just puts the phone down. He finally learned the last rule. Once the mountain calls your name, you are its story, and the story doesn't end well for the hiker. He had broken the first rule, and now he belonged to the mountain's dark, constant hum, forever waiting for the creature to call him home. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload. Story 2. The Cairn of Perpetual Return. The cold wasn't just physical. It was auditory. Every breath taken by Liam, Chloe, and Sam was a puff of white smoke followed by a dry, rasping sound that seemed to drown out the already muffled forest noise. They were 3 days into the most challenging section of their winter hike in the Roan Highlands, a 3-day, 30-mile loop famed for its unforgiving, exposed balds and its sudden, brutal changes in weather. They were college students, veterans of day hikes but rookies when it came to true, deep winter through hiking. Liam, the pragmatic leader, carried the map and the guilt of having convinced the others this was a character-building exercise. Sam, the quietest, carried the most weight and the ever-present anxiety. Chloe, the most buoyant, had started the trip with a vibrant energy that the cold had steadily beaten down to a grim, forced cheerfulness. Their third day began with a near catastrophe. The temperature had plunged overnight, freezing the water in their filtration pumps. They wasted 2 precious hours melting snow on their stoves just to refill their bottles. By the time they started moving, the sky was a bruised purple, promising snow. "We need to make it to that shelter, even if it means hiking past dusk," Liam announced, tracing the map with a gloved finger. "It's 7 miles. We push hard. What about that old fire tower?" Chloe asked, stamping her feet to ward off the chill. It's closer. Liam shook his head. Abandoned. No roof. No walls. Just exposed metal. It's not on the main at Blaze, either. Stick to the plan. They hiked on, their conversation dissolving into the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the frozen ground. The silence of the mountain was immense, pressing in on them. Unlike the summer, there was no insect hum, no songbird chatter, just the wind whistling a lonely, high-pitched tune across the ridgelines. At about 4 o'clock, they passed through a narrow, overgrown gap in the trail. Here, the white blaze markers were strangely faded, almost invisible against the lichen-covered bark. Liam stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. They listened. The only sound was the wind and the blood rushing in their ears. "What?" Sam asked, his voice cracking. "I don't know. A bell, or wood hitting stone." Liam squinted at the dense undergrowth to their left, where the mountain dropped steeply into a ravine. It was definitely a man-made sound. Not natural. Chloe shivered. "It's the wind, Liam. Let's go. I can't feel my toes." Liam, however, was mesmerized. He stepped a few yards off the official path, pushing aside thick rhododendron branches. "Hold up," he called out, his voice now tight with surprise. "There's something here." Sam and Chloe reluctantly followed. Pushing through the thicket, they entered a small, forgotten clearing. In the center, standing like a broken tooth, was a stone structure that was clearly not natural. It was a cairn, but unlike the small, tidy piles hikers leave. This was massive, perhaps 7 feet tall, built of dark, irregular stones stacked without mortar. It was far too large and far too old to be a modern trail marker. It looked more like a tomb or a grim monument. A single, thick rope, frayed and gray, was still tied around the topmost stone, almost fused into the rock by years of weather. "Who builds something like this?" Sam breathed, immediately unnerved. Liam walked closer, circling the pile. The air around the cairn felt different, not just cold, but drained of energy. The stone looked wet, even though everything else was frozen stiff. "Look at this," Liam said, running his fingers over the lower stones. "The way they're stacked. It's not just random. It's defensive. Like someone was trying to keep something here, or maybe keep something out." Chloe pulled her hat lower. "It's giving me the creeps, Liam. It feels like someone died here." As if on cue, a sudden, powerful gust of wind roared down the mountain. It hit the cairn with a force that made the rope around the top stone snap taut, producing a thin, whipping thwack that had been the sound Liam heard, the sound of wood hitting stone. The wind carried with it a sharp, metallic tang, like old blood and rust. Liam pulled out his phone. No service. He checked his downloaded maps. This structure was not marked. "We'll set up here," he declared suddenly, turning around. "What? No. Liam, we have a shelter goal," Chloe protested. "No, we don't. It's getting dark, and this clearing is sheltered. We'll set up our tents right behind the cairn. It'll block the worst of the wind. We can make up the time tomorrow." His voice was oddly decisive, dismissive of their concerns. It was the first small tremor of the strange influence that had already started to work on their pragmatic leader. They set up camp quickly, Liam insisting they pitch their 3 tents side by side, huddled directly against the huge, cold stone of the cairn. As the last of the purple light faded, Sam and Chloe watched Liam. He was acting strangely. He sat not by the stove where he was supposed to be melting more water, but facing the cairn, staring at the structure as if it were a complex mathematical puzzle. "You okay, Liam?" Chloe asked, passing him a mug of lukewarm soup. Liam took the mug but didn't drink. He pointed to the rope. "That's what they used. The rope. Used for what? To drag the stones. To tie it down. They were 3 men. Not more than 3. It says so right here. He was tracing a deep scratch mark on a lower stone. It wasn't legible writing, just random grooves. Liam, you're just tired. Let's eat and get inside, Sam said gently. We can't leave until it's secure, Liam muttered, standing up abruptly. He grabbed a heavy branch and began scraping dirt from around the base of the cairn, a frenzy of activity that seemed completely unnecessary. It's got to be level. They said it had to be level. Who said? Liam. Chloe's cheerfulness was now fully gone, replaced by anxiety. The others, Liam replied, straightening up. His eyes, usually clear and focused, were dark and dull in the headlamp beam. The others that came up the mountain for the silver. They were fools, and they failed. We won't fail. Sam and Chloe exchanged a glance of pure alarm. Liam was hallucinating, maybe showing signs of hypothermia, though his movements were too strong for that. They managed to talk him into his tent, securing the vestibule zipper with a piece of paracord. Inside their separate tents, the night was long and cold. The wind picked up, occasionally rattling the loose stones of the cairn right beside them, a dry, grinding noise that kept them awake. Around 2 a.m., Sam woke to a voice. It wasn't the wind. It was Liam's voice, but the accent was wrong. It was thick and guttural, an old, almost impossible dialect of English. He was talking in his sleep, or perhaps not sleeping at all. He ain't got the grit, Silas. Too smooth in the hands. The land don't want him here. The silver's ours. Sam sat bolt upright. He whispered. Chloe, did you hear that? Silence from Chloe's tent. He zipped his vestibule open, risking the cold air, and unclipped his headlamp. He shone the beam toward Liam's tent. Liam, he called out softly. The voice answered, not with his name, but with a sudden, jarring laugh, harsh and empty, devoid of humor. You were always the soft one, Thomas. Always the one to flinch at the sight of the blood. Don't worry, the master will clean up the debt. Sam's blood ran cold. Silas. Thomas. Who was Liam talking to? He heard a quiet, almost imperceptible sound from Chloe's tent. It was a rhythmic, scratching noise, like fingernails on dry canvas. Sam backed into his sleeping bag, shaking. The name, Thomas, seemed to linger in the air. He tried to tell himself that Liam was having a vivid nightmare, brought on by the exhaustion and the cold. But the old, poisonous contempt in Liam's voice was unmistakable. It wasn't Liam anymore. Morning brought a whiteout. Snow was falling in thick, heavy curtains, driven horizontally by a fierce wind. Visibility was perhaps 5 feet. They were trapped. Liam was outside their tents, standing stiffly beside the cairn, staring into the swirling white chaos. He had the ice axe in his hand, gripping the wooden handle like a club. We ain't movin', he stated flatly when Sam and Chloe finally emerged. The mountain's got its teeth set. Liam, we have to move, Chloe insisted, trying to sound firm. We can barely see. We need to get down to the tree line before this storm buries us. Liam turned. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused, but the most unsettling change was his demeanor. He seemed physically heavier, older, his shoulders hunched with a malevolent fatigue that didn't suit his 20-year-old frame. You'll not tell me what's required, Thomas, Liam growled, the strange, thick accent back. The silver is here. We only need the map. And the map is gone. Sam finally put the pieces together. The cairn. The lost equipment, the trail map, which Liam swore he'd packed. Liam wasn't sick. He was possessed. Or, worse, the spirit held within the cairn, the spirit of the original builder, was rewriting Liam's personality, turning him into a historical echo. Liam, my name is Sam, Sam said slowly, trying to ground him. We are hikers. It's 2025. There is no silver. We need to leave the cairn. Liam laughed the dry, terrible laugh again. You always were the coward, Thomas. Always ready to cut bait and leave the hard work to Silas and me. The map ain't gone, Thomas. You hid it. You and your woman, ready to bolt with the claim. Sam's heart pounded. His woman. He looked at Chloe. She was meticulously packing her gear, but her motions were slow, methodical, almost ritualistic. When she looked up, her expression was placid, her eyes distant. Chloe, he's not well, Sam hissed. We need to get out of here, now. Chloe didn't meet his eyes. She spoke, and her voice was a low, melodic drone, stripped of its normal buoyancy. The map is in the north pocket of your bag, Silas. You know it is. I saw him put it there. Always the liar. Sam looked at his pack. He was always meticulous. He knew the map was not in his pack. But the absolute certainty in Chloe's voice, paired with the complete shift in her personality, was devastating. She was speaking to Liam, who she called Silas, and she was accusing Sam, who she called Thomas. They were not Chloe, Sam, and Liam anymore. They were Silas, Thomas, and the woman. A cruel, jealous triangle of greed and betrayal, pulled from the cold ground beneath the cairn. The cairn, Sam realized, looking at the ominous stone. It's not a marker. It's a tomb. And we're the next bodies to fill the roles. Liam, Silas raised the ice axe, pointing it not at them, but at the cairn itself. This stone holds the proof, Thomas. It holds the line of fire. The line of fire. Sam remembered the history of the region. Settlers fighting over claims, feuds turning bloody, and the constant threat of forest fires meant to erase evidence. Suddenly, Liam, or Silas, took a staggering step back, the axe falling to the ground. He clutched his head, his body shaking violently. My head, it hurts. Liam cried out, his modern voice momentarily fighting through the possession. Sam, help me. What are we doing here? It was a window of clarity, brief but profound. Sam rushed forward, grabbing Liam's arm. We're leaving. Now. But as Sam pulled him, Chloe, the woman, stepped in front of them, blocking the path toward the descent. She held a small bag of salt. The salt Sam kept for cooking and seasoning, and was sprinkling a thin, white line on the snow, encircling the three of them and the cairn. You can't leave, Silas, Chloe's old voice whispered, cold and persuasive. The debt must be paid. The master demands the claim, and you cannot run from the pact of salt and stone. The line of salt was a simple thing, but it felt like a cage of iron bars. As soon as she finished the circle, the surrounding snowstorm seemed to intensify, creating an almost supernatural barrier of white noise and blinding fog just beyond the line. Chloe, snap out of it. Sam pleaded, pulling at her arm. She looked at him with empty eyes. My name is not Chloe. My name is the name he calls me, and I am here for the debt. She pointed at Liam, whose face was again contorted with historical rage. The woman will not protect you, Thomas. Liam, Silas screamed, lunging for the ice axe. Sam shoved Chloe aside and tackled Liam. They fell into the snow, grappling fiercely. Liam was stronger than Sam remembered, driven by a desperate, ancient fury. It was you. You hid the map under the stone. Liam, Silas roared, his breath reeking of something sickly sweet, like dried tobacco and old leather. You betrayed me. You took the only woman who ever looked at me like a man. Sam struggled, trying to wrestle the axe free. He finally wrenched the axe away, throwing it uselessly into the snow outside the salt line. Liam immediately stopped fighting. He looked past Sam, toward the cairn, his expression changing to one of abject terror. "The master," he whispered, his voice shaking. "He's coming for the balance." Sam followed his gaze. The cairn. The dense pile of stones was beginning to unsettle. Slowly, deliberately, the bottommost stones were shifting outward, grinding against the frozen ground, widening the base. The whole structure was sinking, opening a dark, ragged space between the bottom layer and the earth. From that space, an intense heat radiated, carrying with it the overwhelming stench of sulfur and burning pine. A sound emerged from the widening gap. A low, rhythmic thud-thud-thud, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat of the earth. Liam scrambled backwards, fear momentarily purging the possession. "We built it wrong. We built it for the silver, but we sealed the master inside." Chloe, the woman, walked calmly toward the hole, her arms outstretched. "He demands the debt, Silas. The silver was the lie. The lives are the payment." She paused at the edge of the widening gap. She turned back to Sam. For a second, just one fleeting second, her eyes cleared, and Chloe looked out at him, filled with a horrified, desolate clarity. "Sam, we killed each other here. Over nothing. Don't let it happen again," she shrieked, the old and new voice blending into a sound of pure agony. Then, the clarity vanished. The look of cold resolution returned. She stepped into the darkness beneath the cairn. The stones groaned, a horrible, scraping noise, and settled back down, sealing the gap. The air was instantly freezing again. The smell of sulfur vanished. Liam stood up, his face a blank mask of exhaustion. He looked at Sam, utterly lost. "Where's Chloe? What did I say? Why are we standing in this circle?" The possession had lifted, but the terror was not over. Sam didn't answer. He looked at the cairn, now completely silent and settled. He looked at the line of salt, still faintly visible in the accumulating snow. He understood the horror of the cairn of perpetual return. It wasn't a gateway to another dimension. It was a recording. It was a historical trap. 3 people, Silas, Thomas, and the woman, had met their end here in a jealous, violent betrayal over a false claim. The cairn was the monument to that violence, built to contain the malicious spirit, the master, that had driven them to it. When new hikers stumbled upon the stone, the proximity and the cold allowed the spirits to possess them, forcing them into the roles of Silas, Thomas, and the woman. They were doomed to repeat the cycle, ensuring the master's malice was fed by fresh betrayal and death. Chloe had just stepped into the role of the original victim, fulfilling the cycle. Sam, now Thomas's final victim, felt a cold, sharp dread settle over him. He was the survivor, the one meant to be haunted. "We have to leave the cairn," Sam whispered, scrambling for the ice axe. "We can't," Liam said softly, looking down at the ground. "We're in the salt circle. The mountain won't let us cross the line." Sam grabbed Liam by the collar. "There is no line. It's just salt." He dragged Liam toward the edge of the circle. He forced his boot to cross the white line in the snow. As his boot landed on the other side, his entire body seized. It wasn't pain. It was the intense, violent rejection of the mountain. He felt a pressure that nearly burst his eardrums, and the air around the salt line shimmered with a pale, electric blue. He was violently thrown backward, landing hard beside Liam. Liam was smiling, but it was not a happy smile. It was the detached, final acceptance of the condemned. "It works, Thomas," Liam said, but now his voice held the deep weariness of Silas, a man who had accepted his fate centuries ago. "The master keeps the balance. The cairn must be fed with 3 souls before it frees one. And you, Thomas, you're the last coin." Sam looked at the cairn. The stones looked rougher now, stained with an old, iron-red hue. He realized that the stones were not just ordinary mountain rocks. They were markers. Each stone was a record, a fossilized reminder of every person who had ever been drawn to the site and played out the final, violent act. He grabbed his pack, his mind racing. Chloe was gone. Liam was gone. He was alone, trapped inside a salt circle, a repeating scene in a mountain tragedy. He had to break the circle. Not by crossing the line, but by erasing the record. He didn't grab the axe. He grabbed the shovel end of his snow probe. He started frantically scooping up handfuls of snow and salt, tossing them high into the swirling whiteout. He scraped the ground where the line had been, trying to mix the salt into the earth, to neutralize the boundary. Liam watched him, his smile unchanging. "You can't erase a debt, Thomas. It's written in the stone." Sam kept shoveling. The air around him was screaming, a sound of wind and sorrow and grinding stone. His hands were raw, bleeding through his gloves. He shoveled until the salt line was completely gone, diluted into the snow, the earth scraped bare. He stopped, breathing hard, heart pounding. The white noise of the snowstorm seemed to quiet. He slowly put his foot down, stepping outside the now erased line. Nothing. No seizure. No electric rejection. He pulled Liam to his feet. "Come on. We run now." Liam looked at the cairn, then back at the scraped ground, his face shifting between Silas's contempt and Liam's fear. The moment of clarity from Liam was gone. He was Silas again. "I won't leave the silver, Thomas. It's mine. You'll not have it." Liam twisted free of Sam's grasp and sprinted for the cairn, embracing the cold stone like a long-lost friend. Sam didn't follow. He turned his back on the horrific monument and started running blind into the whiteout, following the only sound he trusted: the high, relentless whistle of the wind down the slope. He ran until he collapsed, half buried in a drift, hours later. He was found by a SAR team the next morning, hypothermic, delirious, and babbling about salt lines and silver claims. When the team went back to the old gap where Sam said he had camped, they found no cairn. They found no snowdrift, and no deep-set stones. They only found a small, oddly neat pile of three, well-worn, moss-covered rocks, marking nothing but a bend in the neglected trail. But Sam knows the cairn is still there. Sometimes, when he looks at old geological maps of the Roan region, he finds a faded name for that spot: the Three Witnesses. And he knows he left Liam and Chloe behind. They are now part of the history, the three names destined to be repeated, waiting silently in the cold shadows of the mountain for the next three unwary friends to stumble off the blaze and discover the true weight of the stone. He broke the cycle, but he couldn't save his friends from being ridden into the mountain's ledger. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.